The coming automation revolution will take your job. It is inevitable. It will take your job someday, as it will take everyone's jobs. But the flip side is it's going to make you wealthy, and I'm going to show you how. Ready? Let's dive in. I recently outlined this entire thing on a Twitter thread, and I got some interesting questions, so I thought it would be best to make a full-blown video about this to explain it, because a lot of how automation will replace or take people's jobs but make people wealthier, it goes down to the basic principles of economics, how the economic machine actually works. Most people don't understand this, so I want to break it down piece by piece. So, number one, where did we start? What is the default state? We started with absolutely nothing. The default state is absolutely zero wealth. And when I say wealth, I mean stuff, I mean value, I mean goods, I mean services, I mean things with utility. There's absolutely nothing. That's the default state. Let's say humanity arrives on Earth tomorrow. First human is born, no humans around before this. We arrive on Earth. It's complete chaos. There is absolutely no value there. That is the default state. The only thing that exists is the raw materials, the things like the wood in the trees and the rocks in the ground and the fruit on the plants and the food in the animals' meat. So we have a bunch of raw materials, but it's just potential. The default state is that there is no value. There's just potential. That's raw materials that could be used to create value, to create wealth, to create stuff that we want or need. But right now, the default state is nothing. So how do we then take raw materials, take nothingness, take pure potential, and transform it into value, into wealth, into something useful? The answer to that is labor. And that's the only answer, is labor. So the problem with this is that we are constrained by human labor. So go back to the beginning, we go out and we forage for food. We hunt for food. We have to chop down a tree with a rock, or maybe we smash the rock into an axe shape first, then we chop down the tree and we use the wood from that to make a little shelter. And so we use our human labor to transform raw materials, pure potential, into reality, into something that is wealth, that is useful, that is valuable. So human labor transforms scarcity into abundance, nothingness into somethingness, by turning raw materials, potential, into reality, into wealth. But there's a constraint on this, which is the human labor capacity, because I can only work for 16 hours a day at most and sleep 8 hours. And so my constraint is on my human labor. The amount of stuff that can be produced has the constraint of how many people are laboring to produce it. And as with any business, as with anything, if there's a bottleneck and you want an output, that output will be restricted based on how big that bottleneck is, not how big the inputs are. So the inputs, the raw materials in the world, basically infinite, especially considering other planets. We have an infinite amount of raw resources, but that's just potential. There's no actual wealth or value there yet, so that's still pure scarcity. So how do we transform that? It doesn't matter how big that is, those inputs, they still have to go through the bottleneck, which is human labor. So how do we expand the bottleneck? How do we fix those constraints? We outsource human labor. We outsource it to animals at first through most of human history, and now we outsource it to machines. And the more we can outsource human labor to now machines, the bigger that bottleneck gets, so the more inputs we can pass through the system to create more abundance on the other side. The bigger the bottleneck is, and the more we remove those constraints by outsourcing human labor, the more abundance we can create from scarcity. This means that as we lose human jobs, human labor, as we outsource those things to machines, the net result is more abundance, more wealth, more good stuff. So the question is, what about the lost jobs? Because that seems terrible when you look through today's lens. We look at all these jobs that everybody has, like the big one is like truck drivers today. Isn't that a bad thing? Well, nobody today complains about the loss of jobs from hundreds or thousands of years ago, like making bricks by hand, weaving a roof together by hand with plant parts, sewing for yourself one piece of clothing you're going to wear for your whole life and patching it, foraging for food in the forest. building a buggy for your horse. All of those jobs, or the things that those jobs accomplished, have been outsourced to animals and machines. Nobody complains about those jobs being lost. Why? Because it's a good thing. I don't need to patch my clothes because it's $6 for me to get a new shirt. That requires this much labor, whereas before, my one shirt had to last forever because the amount of labor it costs to get that material and turn into a shirt was a huge amount of labor for one shirt. So all these jobs that have been lost throughout history, 99.999% of jobs that have been lost throughout history, are net gains for everybody. Not just for some, for everyone. Why is that? Because these jobs were outsourced, so that labor was moved from humans to machines and animals. That removed a little constraint of human labor, making that bottleneck a little bit bigger so we can take more of the inputs, the raw materials, the scarcity, and push it through the system and transform it into abundance, into real wealth, into the goods, the services, and the things that people want and need. So the net result of outsourcing human labor is more abundance, more wealth. So big objection here. This is the big objection that everybody has. So if you're thinking this right now, I'm sorry, you're not exactly unique or smart because everybody has this objection. What about those people with the lost jobs? They won't be able to afford all that cheap stuff. They'll have fewer jobs. So how will all that extra wealth help them? They can't afford to get their hands on it. Sorry, that's incorrect. Number one, we always have, and number two, we always will. So the question is how? Well, we have to measure the cost in terms of labor, not money. Because money just confuses things. The value of money is wildly volatile, fluctuates throughout time, mostly depreciates. And so we can't measure things in money, especially over long time horizons, because it's all different. We have to measure it with something that's constant, like labor. So let me ask you a few questions. How much labor does it take you? Does it cost you to get fed for one day? Because it used to be that it took you an entire day's labor to get one meal for one day. And then the next day, you'd work all day long to get fed for one more day. And then you'd work all day long to get fed for one more day. It cost you an entire day's worth of labor, sometimes multiple days worth of labor to get one day of food. How much labor does it take you to travel across the country compared to how much labor it used to cost you 300 years ago? 300 years ago, it took your entire life to literally walk and ride on a horse's back to get across the country. You would probably think to yourself, if you were 40 years old, hey, at least my children will get there. I'll never make it. I'll die before we get there, but at least my children will get there. That's a lot of labor. Compared to today, it takes the labor of a few people running the plane, a few people to fuel it up, a few people to get the oil and resources out of the ground to turn it into the fuel, a few people to make the materials to put together into the plane, and then a few of your own days of labor to purchase the ticket to hop on that plane, fly across the country. Yes, it's a lot of labor. Nothing like what it used to be 300 years ago. How much labor does it cost you to listen to music today versus listening to music 30 years ago? 30 years ago, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to do some labor to go to the store, you buy some music, and that cost you money, which cost you labor to get that money. You had to buy a record, you had to buy a CD. Today, the amount of labor it costs you to listen to music is basically zero. There's almost an infinite amount of music available for free for everybody 24/7. So whether we're talking about necessary like goods and services like food, semi-necessary like transportation and the speed and the ease of use of that transportation, or luxuries like entertainment and music, the cost of everything throughout time has decreased because it has gone from scarce to abundant, from raw material and nothingness to real goods, wealth, value, usable goods and services. So when you measure things in labor, outsourcing human labor to animals and machines has allowed people to afford more stuff, not less. Even the poorest people alive today, the homeless people in America, are fat. The wealth, the stuff that people want, food, shelter, clothing, is cheap enough that the amount of labor necessary to get those things for everybody today is vastly lower than what it used to be. And the longer time horizon you look at, the more extreme that difference gets. Keep in mind, all of this despite the job loss. 99.99% of jobs that have ever existed throughout history don't exist anymore today. All those job losses are good, not bad. So how does that cost, though, actually go down? Mechanically speaking, what is the mechanism there that causes those prices to fall? And when I say prices, again, we're measuring in labor time, not in money, because money changes throughout time. It's hard to measure with a changing yardstick. So if you measure with labor, how does that cost go down? Well, it goes back to the most basic economic principle ever, supply and demand. As supply increases, the cost goes down, all else being equal. Example, let's say we press a magic button and the number of cars on Earth 10x's. We've got 10 times the amount of cars that we have today, and they're all brand new cars. Do you think that cars will become more expensive if that happens, or less expensive if that happens? Less expensive, because it used to be that they were fairly scarce, so it would require $30,000, $40,000, which might be a whole entire year's salary for you to be able to buy a new car. But now they're so abundant that somebody might be willing to sell a couple of them for less than that because they've got extras. And so they don't need to hold on to all of them. They will only need to hold on to one maybe, and they'll sell the other 9 that they got. And so the abundance means the prices go down, again, all else being equal. And as we outsource labor from humans to machines, the output on the other side of the system increases because that bottleneck gets bigger, so we can force more inputs through the system and the outputs increase. So the increase in the supply of the outputs, which is real wealth and goods and services, increases over time. This means as the supply increases, the costs go down. Supply and demand. Everyone wins. This means you get wealthier because it costs you less to get more. End of story. That's it. That's basically what it comes down to. It costs you less to get more. Less labor to get more of what you want. And the more you can get with the less cost, the wealthier you are. That's the definition of wealth. So if we measure cost in labor, it shows that as we outsource human labor, it increases the size of the bottleneck, allowing more wealth to be produced, allowing the cost of wealth to go down, meaning people can afford to get more wealth, resulting in, definitionally speaking, wealthier individuals despite any job losses that may happen. This has been the way it has happened for all of human history, and it is the way it will continue to happen for all of human future, including the coming automation revolution. It is no different. So yes, a machine will eventually take your job. And the sooner that happens, the better off you'll be because it will make you wealthier. As always, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.